Hi everyone, welcome. You'll see, I think, that I'm sharing my screen here, PolitiFact, and we'll come to that in a second. What I'm going to do in this video is go over this question that popped up. Well, I think it was the question I was asking you to answer, at least part of the question. But it's this: is Trumpism a threat to globalization? Is it a movement against globalization? And I'd like you to use this video as sort of an example of how you might want to go about answering some of the questions and some of the sub-questions that you'll come up with for the essay. So the things that I'm about to do sort of verbally, it's worth, I strongly recommend, I suppose, you thinking in this sort of a way when you start to write your papers. And this might be a paper section. Don't do exactly what I'm about to do here. I'm not sure how well that will fit in with the overall questions that I'm asking. But don't do exactly what I'm about to do, but the principles, right? And we'll talk about some of those as I go. The question, and so the first principle really is, the main question's been given to you, but there's still work to be done on the questions for your main paper. You'll probably want to answer, 4 or 5 questions that are sort of under the heading of that bigger question, right? Sort of work together in some way. And so the question that I'm going to demonstrate here, and the question that I hope will be interesting in the context of Trumpism that we're looking at this week, is this very specific question. The question is this: is Donald Trump, and is Trumpism, is it against globalization? Does it act against globalization? Or alternatively, and this is a suggestion that one of you made in your response, that actually Trumpism isn't about rejecting globalization or working against globalization, but it's about using globalization to get the best deal for the United States. So when you introduce a question like that, as I've just done, the first good move would be to explain the question a little bit. Start talking about, because there are some objections that you come up with for that question, right? Is there something about globalization? And so now we're going to start to define the terms if we're writing a paper. Is there something about globalization that makes trying to get the best for America, maybe America specifically, or for any other country, right? For the best for Germany, right? The best for Nigeria, the best for India. Is there something about globalization that makes that antithetical to the idea of globalization, right? It's saying, hey, we're going to get the best for the United States, we're going to put America first. Is that automatically anti-globalization, anti-globalist? Or is that what globalization is about? It's about all of the countries trying to get the best for themselves, right? And so that's something that you, when you're starting to explain that, when you're starting to talk about what is globalization, right? And, is this a valid question? Why is it a good question? That's one thing that you might want to turn to the readings for. You might want to go back to when we read about neoliberalism and start writing, sort of building, and about Trumpism, right? And you might want to, what is Trump saying, right? What is it that he's saying or doing that's against globalization? Okay, so that's going to be our question, and that's one issue that you want to sort out once you've sort of stated that as your aim, right? In this section, I'm going to talk about whether Trumpism is anti-globalist, right? Is against globalization, or whether it's uses globalization to get the best for the United States. One of the things you'll want to, is that possible, right? Can you be a globalist and a nationalist, right? Can you try and get the best for your own country in a state? Is there anybody that's not doing that? Is there a state, and of course Trump argues that that's what the United States has been doing, right? That it's been interested in sort of integrating the world into a world system, but in doing that, it's really, it's giving money away, right, to do that. It's giving jobs away, money away in order to achieve this goal. And he doesn't want to, that's a price too much for President Trump. So, and you could go into that, into this sort of in a theory section where you're explaining what you mean by the question. What does globalization mean? What does it mean to be trying to get the best for the United States in a system of globalization? What does it mean otherwise, right? What's the alternative to that? Which might be the thing that Trump says, right, that the United States has been doing. Okay. You might want to turn to sort of the empirical world, right? You might want to turn to look somewhere and find something that's going to help you answer this question, right? Some sort of a source, some sort of proof. And so this is why I got PolitiFact. Now, when you do get to a source, when you do decide, hey, let me explain what I'm about to do. And this is what you might want to do in your paper as well. You might want to say, okay, in order to answer this question, what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to look at some of the promises that Trump made, because I think that he's the best articulator of Trumpism, right? Who better than the man himself, right, to tell us what Trumpism means. So we're going to turn to things that President Trump or Donald Trump has said, before he was president, before he was elected, what he's promised, and I'm going to see. I want to find out as well a little bit why he's promising these things as well. And it just so happens that there's a great tool for that. I think quite a good tool for PolitiFact. There are accusations from all sides that it's biased, and it might be biased. And one of the things that it does, right, is it's a fact checker, right? It claims to check facts, and so you'll see, promise broken here. Top 5 promises: repeal Obamacare, Trump or media, promise broken, right? And whether it is biased, in whether it's one thing to do if you're ever going to use this for this or for any other purpose, is to sort of read the, and we're going to read a few of them now, right? Because read the right, because oftentimes even when you'll see here that they have like yellow for stalled. I think yellow is stalled. This sort of rainbow color here means that there's been a compromise on cancelled global warming payments, right? Where he hasn't done everything he said, but he's done some of it, and then he's made up for it in other ways, perhaps. The red is he just broke the promise. That's a promise broken, and the green is a promise kept, right? So that part of it may or may not be biased, right? I find that when I read it, sometimes when it says that he didn't do it, that he broke the promise, when you read it, sometimes it's right that he didn't manage to get that through Congress, right, because Congress became controlled by the Democrats, or he was stopped in the courts, or and sometimes he just didn't do the thing that he said he would do, right? Or sometimes he kind of did part of it as much as he could, right? So I find that the green, the red, the sort of multicolored thing there, and the yellow, that I sometimes disagree with. Either they've said he's kept it, and I don't think he has, or they've said he's not kept it, and I think, well, he's come close to it, close enough for me to give him that one. So I find that, but what I do find here is I find a convenient list of all the promises that he's made, and I find when I click on them as well, I find that there will be some explanation about why he's doing it, perhaps, right? Some quotes from him, and so. Whether or not you think PolitiFact is neutral is in some way secondary, because all I'm going to use this for is to look at what is the promise, and then also I'm going to look, can I glean from this write-up with lots of quotes from either President Trump himself or members of his administration that will explain the promise, right? And so, in as much as they're quotes, I'm not worried about whether PolitiFact is biased, right? Now, if you're telling me that the quotes on here are not true quotes, right, or that the promises here are not true promises, then I have a problem, right? Then the method I'm about to use is a bad method on that basis, but not on whether or not PolitiFact says he's broken the promise. Because I'm not asking myself here whether he's broken the promise or not broken the promise. All I'm asking for is what were the promises? Right? What is Trumpism? What are some of the things? Okay, what are some of the things that he's promised? That's one. The second thing that I'm going to do now with PolitiFact, right, is I have this list of all the promises that PolitiFact have put up there, right? Admittedly, I'm relying on them for all the promises. There's a lot of promises there. For my purposes, that's good enough. But now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make my own judgment now, right? Which is another place where we could fall down. But here's the judgment that I'm making. I'm making the judgment about whether or not this promise relates to globalization or not. Right? And I could come up with a systematic way of doing this, but to some extent, it's always going to be a little bit subjective. So, for example, I'm looking here: develop a plan to defeat ISIS in 30 days. I may or may not think, right, that defeating ISIS is a problem of globalization. I think there's arguments to say that yes, ISIS is sort of implicated in globalization. Right? It uses sort of the tools of spreading messages and images around the world quickly. It uses those tools that are sort of an element of globalization. And it recruits people from all over. So in that sense, it's maybe an element of globalization. But it's probably not an economic thing, right? It's not about trade, for example, really, although we could relate it to oil maybe, because of the place that ISIS is operating. So, so in our definition of the question, right, we probably want to talk about what globalization means, because if we're just taking a purely economic view of it, and I'm not going to be, but if I were to do that, then that would lead me to selecting different promises than if I'm including things like ISIS, which I might. Something like defund Planned Parenthood to me doesn't seem like it's really related to globalization. It doesn't seem like that's going to help me to understand what he's promising about defunding Planned Parenthood. It doesn't seem like it's going to help me decide whether or not he's against globalization or not against globalization. But again, that's something that is a judgment call. Okay. So I'm going to look through some of the promises, and this is identifying, again, what I'm doing is I'm using this to identify what is Trumpism, what are some of the promises that he's making, what are some of the things he wants to accomplish, right? That's Trumpism. Second thing I'm doing is I'm going to try and decide which of these touch on globalization, and I'm going to have a look at them. I'm going to say, okay, is he promising to get rid of globalization? Is he promising to fight globalization? Is that the thing he's fighting? Right, a lot of you, I think, in your answers thought, yes, he was. And I think that's I think partly the readings, right? But I also think that's a sort of a standard understanding, right, of what Trump is about. And we'll see, I think, as we go through some of these promises, reasons why that's a fair reason why that's a fair question and a fair conclusion, and perhaps we'll also find some counterpoints. And that's of course what I like. What I enjoy doing is seeing the same thing from multiple points of view and sort of springing up these new ways of looking at the world. That's what I enjoy. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Stop TPP. You'll know, right, that the TPP, what is the Trans-Pacific Partnership? On the face of it, first of all, what we're seeing is, Trump is withdrawing the United States from a multilateral trade agreement. That, in as much as globalization is about free trade across borders, this might be a point where we say, yep, Trump has ordered a withdrawal from the TPP of the United States. Therefore, he doesn't want the United States to participate anymore in global trade. So he's anti-globalization, right? That might be a fair thing to say. And this is one of the reasons I like PolitiFact is we have this here. So Trump has signed this presidential memoranda, which is sort of like a presidential, what's the other one? Executive order, I should say. It's kind of like an executive order. And what he's telling his people to do is to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was one of his campaign promises. Trump called the memorandum a great thing for the American worker, right? America First, which a lot of you mentioned. The memorandum sent to the US Trade Representative, right, from President Trump. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, hereby directed to withdraw the United States as a signatory from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Right, so now we're withdrawing from a multilateral international trade deal. Is this anti-globalization claim? To permanently withdraw the United States from TPP negotiations. But here we go, and to begin pursuing, wherever possible, bilateral trade negotiations to promote American industry, protect American workers, and raise American wages. You are directed to provide written notifications to the parties. Okay. Now, this is one piece of evidence we have here. And this piece of evidence, right, written by the president, says, if we believe PolitiFact, and this would be a big lie, right, by PolitiFact, if this is not what it said, and we could check this. But it's saying here, it's saying that we're withdrawing the United States from the TPP negotiations, and we're going to begin pursuing bilateral trade negotiations. What this can be read, at least what I can read this as, is look, we want to be involved in international trade, but this is the wrong deal for the United States. We want to protect American workers, raise American wages. Now, you can have a debate about whether this action, this withdrawal from the TPP, will really accomplish these things, right? Will really accomplish promoting American industry, protecting American workers. You can absolutely debate that. But remember what our question is. Our question isn't that. It could be that, but in this occasion, it's not that. That's not a bad question. Does President Trump's policies promote protection of American workers? That's a great question. And it's one that we're not answering here. But if we were to answer that, we'd have to say, okay, he's withdrawn from the TPP. What are the results of that for the American worker? But that's, again, not what we're doing. We're only really doing one thing. And this is what I definitely recommend that you do in your papers. You only try to do one thing at a time. And so the one thing that we're doing is asking the question, is President Trump fighting globalization? This particular promise doesn't seem to be, at least if globalization is about free trade, he is withdrawing from one trade agreement, but he wants to pursue other trade agreements. Okay, at least that's what he's saying in the memorandum. All right. Yeah, that's the other thing that we were always going to have is, well, is this really what he wants? Is he saying what he truly wants? But I'm kind of the thought that if we're going to have something called Trumpism, that we should probably just take what he says as Trumpism, right? Otherwise, why is he saying it in public? That's my, that's my take on it. So that's the Stop TPP one. I'm looking at some of this, like sue his accusers of sexual misconduct. That doesn't, to me, seem like it's really related to globalization / federal regulations. Could possibly be, but I'm not going to look at that one. Cancel the Paris Climate Accord. That might be, right? This is about environmentalism, but it's a global agreement. Again, like the TPP, it's an international agreement. He says, let's bring us out of that. Cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord and the draconian financial and economic burdens the agreement imposes on our country. That again, right, and then in lengthy remarks, Trump painted a dystopian picture of an American economy ruined by international agreements to benefit its rivals. The latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States. Here we go. I cannot, in good conscience, support a deal that punishes the United States. Again, right, if we're wanting to, or if we, it seems to me at least like I'm being pushed into this view of Trumpism, right, that it's not that he's against international agreements as such, he just thinks that the ones that we have are not benefiting the United States. Now, again, depending on how you've set up the question and how you've answered the mini question about whether you can you want the best for the United States and be globalist. If you can, then maybe this is what Trump is getting at in these first two promises. If not, then that's another. Then you're going to say, look, he's anti-globalist because he thinks that globalization is inherently bad for the United States. But we'll have to see if we can find some evidence for that, I think, to support that view. I haven't found that yet, I don't think. So we've got that. What else have we got? Repeal the alternative minimum tax. You know, in some ways, economics, it's hard to really distinguish between is this economic promise about globalization or not, because of course they are. The economy is quite. Here's a foreign policy one here, move the US Embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That doesn't seem very globalized. It doesn't seem to be really related to globalization. It is foreign policy, but it's not that. Limit legal immigration, that does seem like it is a migration, immigration to the United States, and migration generally does seem to be about globalization fairly clearly. So let's have a look and see here what he says. He's putting a 30,000 refugee cap. What's this one? Limit legal immigration. So part of legal immigration is, I suppose, refugees, taking in refugees from war-torn and unstable countries where political oppression is a thing. This is the lowest limit, lowest cap ever set. It's a drop from the 45,000 person cap, right? So that's something. Why does Mike Pompeo say that this is the thing? Say that this is happening? Is a commitment to protect the most vulnerable around the world while prioritizing the safety and well-being of the American people, as President Trump has directed, right? Then we've got different. Okay. We've got different limits for different parts of the world there too. Okay. So some limits on refugees there. Maybe that's not quite, although maybe that is globalization. It's about the problems in the world, they affect everybody, and they're caused by everyone, right? The fact that there's a civil war in Syria, sure, that's about Syria, but it's also not only about Syria, it's about Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it's about Russia and the United States. And so because we live in a globalized world where we can really say, hey, this is the Syrian problem, this is everybody's problem, and we've all had a hand in creating it, so we should all have a hand in solving it, right? That is an idea that we might fit under globalization, and so then that would have something to do with that. Let's have a look at this ban on Muslims entering the US, which of course is it's not been able to do if that was a promise. Establish a ban on Muslims entering the United States, right? This is about how the court tried to block the first two executive orders, but the third executive order was upheld because it says here that the text says nothing about religion, right? It wasn't a ban on Muslims. It was a ban on people from a limited number of countries. Syria was one of them. I think was the 7 countries in the end. 5 of them were Muslim majority countries, but it only amounted to 8% of the world's Muslim population. Right? But this might be an anti-globalist promise here, right? Where we're saying if we are indeed establishing a ban on Muslims entering the US, right? Let's just say, hey, there's a group of people, a religious group of people that we don't want to travel here, that we're not going to accept, that we're not going to have in. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. Very nice. Nice language there, but that does seem directed very much at diversity, right? So in diversity, if diversity is a part of globalization, if free movement of people wherever they're wanted, wherever they're needed, wherever they want to go themselves, then that does seem to be anti-globalist, right? So I don't know, there's not much explanation in here, right? This article here on PolitiFact is much more about, well, Justice Roberts says the proclamation is expressly premised on legitimate purposes, preventing entry of nationals, right, who cannot be adequately vetted and inducing other nations to improve their practices. The text says nothing about religion. So this is a question about whether he hasn't really done this, right? He hasn't had a complete, although Trumpism might be about this, right? It might be about a shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Right? That might be that. And then that does seem very much against the idea of free movement of people, right? Or a free exchange of ideas even, right? Of religious diversity, of understanding and valuing people of different religious backgrounds, right? Which might well be a part of globalization. That does seem anti-globalist. And this article really muddies the waters a little bit by saying, hey, look, the reason why he was able to do the thing that he did was that he wasn't doing the thing that he said he would do, right? He wasn't doing it, he wasn't doing this, he was banning people on from particular countries, right, that posed a security risk to the United States. So that again, the actual thing that he did might fit in with our narrative that, hey, he's just wants the best for the United States. He wants to keep the American people secure, including presumably Muslims who are already in the country, right? The way to do that is to ban people from particular countries where the vetting process is not able to be properly done, or is not done to a high enough standard. And I think the list of countries like Syria, North Korea is on that, I think Venezuela. So it's here we go: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, North Korea, Venezuela. So that's again, some of those countries. Two of them are not Muslim majority countries, and then in the case of places like Somalia or Syria, these are places where their governments don't have control. Libya, the same, where governments don't have control of the whole country, and where the administrative function, right, of vetting people who want to migrate to the United States is probably not there. Right? The records are not there. The government structures are not there to be able to do that. And so, in that, what he actually did was this. Right? He's not doing the thing that maybe he said he was, but the thing he said he was. That's what we're saying is Trumpism, right? And that itself might be. I'd be open to arguments, but I can only really see that as sort of an act against globalization, unless you sever like diversity or the movement of people out of globalization. But that seems to me, I wouldn't do that personally. So let's have a look. Remove existing Syrian refugees. That goes along with some of the things that we were saying there. I think we would say the same things. Declare China a currency manipulator. Promise kept, right? Why is he doing this? A weaker yuan relative to the US dollar means Chinese goods can be exported more cheaply to the United States. To devalue Chinese currency in turn blunts the impacts of Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports. Yes. So that part I just read is a PolitiFact thing. So let's see if we find Trump explaining why he wants to do this. He has a tweet, which is his method, right? China dropped the price of their currency to an almost a historical low. It's called currency manipulation. Are you listening, Federal Reserve? This is a major violation which will greatly weaken China over time. Unfair practices, unfair trade practices, including intellectual property theft and dumping Chinese products in US markets. That's what it's part of. Ample control. This again, right? This again, surely, and here would be my argument that I would make from that. I would say, look, the fact that he wants to label China a currency manipulator, the fact that he's upset with some of the trading practices of China suggests that, and here's why he's saying they're not currency manipulators, so that's going to muddy the waters a little bit, but giving some credence to some of the points that you were making in your answers, right, that he might say one thing and then say another thing. I think there was somebody that was talking about, hey, there's no coherent foreign policy, right? But in as much as if we're trying to construct a Trumpism, a coherent Trumpism, here's another thing, right? That labeling China a currency manipulator is not the same as isolationism, right? And surely it does assume that there will be trade between the United States and China. But that simply we'd like a fairer trade, right? Or what Trump would consider fairer trade, right? A trade more favorable to the United States, perhaps not even fairer, right? But a trade more amenable to the United States employment and wealth. And again, it still brings us back to this other question. And this is what good questions do. Like, this is what good writing does. It leads us, yes, certainly it answers this question, but it leads us to other questions. The question that we're trying to answer, again, only one thing we're trying to do is say, is Trumpism anti-globalist? Are his promises anti-globalist? That's one thing we're trying to ask, and the next thing we're asking is, and we're trying to answer that, but a question for another day, right, or for another section of the paper, perhaps, right, is, maybe we've addressed this a little bit already in our theory, but maybe we can look at this, right, is it possible now to be both of these things, right? Is it possible to be both? Trying to get the best for America, trying to, even if your policies won't get the best, right? If you genuinely think that this will make American employment higher, wages higher, that sort of thing. Better trade deals with China, better trade deals with countries on the Pacific Rim, better trade, better environmental regulations, right? Better for the United States, right? More permissive for the United States in order to save jobs and that sort of thing. Can you be doing that, and can you be globalist at the same time? Doesn't it need you to be globalist? Because if you like you said, I think I might be getting a little bit repetitive, which I don't apologize for too much, but you know, if you're dealing with China, if you plan to deal with them over the long term, then yes, you want a better deal. You don't want to be keeping funding. If you think that's what you're doing, right, giving away money all the time to your trade partners, right, you might want a little bit in return. Whether that's true or not, right, is again another question that we're not really dealing with, because we're only doing one thing here. And I'd say this for your papers, right, do one thing in each section. Just do one thing. Focus on that one thing. Build a safe zone for Syrian refugees. Achieve energy independence. This might be globalization, right? Because we might say, well, interdependence. Globalization is about interdependence in everything, economic interdependence, and certainly in China, certainly in energy, right? Under my presidency, we will accomplish a complete American energy independence. Complete. Very energy independent. That's great. That might be. The US consumed roughly 7.8 quadrillion British thermal units, BTUs, produced roughly 8.5, right? So, right, so we're getting pretty close to energy independence. Even so, right, Severin Bornstein says that it doesn't, producing more energy than you consume doesn't make the US energy independent in any economic sense, because the price of oil and gasoline in the United States is driven by the world oil market, and that continues to be true even as we produce a larger and larger share of the oil we consume. So that's that's the debate about whether he's kept the promise. But the fact that the promise is there, that says that's Trumpism, and then is that anti-globalist? Is it anti-globalist to say, no, we'll be energy independent? We won't rely on the Middle East, or we won't rely on Venezuela for that matter, or we won't rely on Venezuela, or Canada perhaps, right? Canada's a big supplier of US oil. We won't rely on any of those regions or countries for our energy. Is that anti-globalist, right? That seems like it could be. So I think we've seen and I can continue doing this, and we could look at a few more. There's a lot more there. If you're interested in this argument and you want to look at a lot more of the promises, go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to stop there because I think you get the idea. What we've done quickly is sort of a model for how you should write. You should come up with one particular question that we're going to answer. We should discuss that question a little bit, define it, define the terms in it, use the readings that we've done to define those. If you want to go beyond those readings, that's fine, but do use those readings. Now try and find some way of answering it, right? And my way of answering whether Trumpism is anti-globalist was to say, right, well, what's Trump said? And then I found somewhere on the internet where it has all of the things that he said that he's promised to do, and some discussion about those, about why he's promised to do them. There's way more ways of using it than just using PolitiFact. I could have gotten all the speeches together and highlighted all the promises and written them down. I figure PolitiFact's already done that for me, so why do the work? You could also look, maybe there was a book somewhere that somebody's already written. I haven't seen it yet, but describing what Trumpism is, and you can just take it from that book. Right? There's all sorts of things you could do, but this was the thing that I decided to do. And I only did it to do one thing, and that was to define Trumpism and to see what he says about and what he does, right? What he's trying to do or what he says he's going to do, all of those things. about globalization, about issues that to me seem globalist issues. And then from that, I've judged whether or not these things that he said were anti-globalization or pro-global. I found some of each, and I could, if I wanted, and if I carried on, and if I went through all of them, perhaps I could come to some sort of conclusion at the end of that section and say, on the weight of evidence, it looks like while there is, this is the argument that I've made for up to now, it might change if I kept looking at them, but you know, while there are clearly some anti-globalist promises, sentiments in Trumpism, such as trying to ban all Muslims from entering the United States, right? Or that was the one, I think, that was the main cause of concern for me. Trying to do that, that seems to go against the spirit of globalization. Energy independence was the other one. Trying to achieve energy independence seems to be to position the United States to withdraw from economic activity in important sectors of the economy with the rest of the world. That might be, but on the TPP, right, on the Paris Climate Accord, it seems to be that the problem is not the on the China currency manipulation thing. The problem doesn't seem to be that we're in relationships of trade with these countries. It seems more to be that the trade is unfavorable to the United States. And that would be my conclusion based on, and again, maybe I would change my mind if I read more of these, but that would be one way to do it. Part of what I'm doing is talking about Trump and Trumpism, but a big part of what I'm doing is trying to sort of let you know what I'm looking for in a paper. All right, so I'm going to finish that there, and hopefully this will be somewhat helpful to you, and see you next time.